Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 18th of December. Thanks for joining us here in Alaska Weather. As always, you can check your latest forecast information at 800-472-0391 for the Alaska Weather Information Line. Find us on the internet at weather.gov/Alaska, or if you can't find what you need, you're free to email me anytime you like, david.snider@noaa.gov. Let's get right to it. A lot of weather's moving into the west coast and the interior, as well as parts of the Susitna Valley and the eastern Alaska Range. We're going to start up north as weather continues to pour in from south to north. Let's start up with the western Arctic coast and areas up north. We're looking at about 2 to 4 inches of snow with a winter weather advisory, or a blizzard warning, I should say, for the northwest coast, up to about 2 to 4 inches here. We're expecting the winds to gust on the order of about 60 miles per hour in many cases, so those strong winds are going to take a quarter right through the Bering Strait and up the western coast, through the Selawik and Baldwin Peninsula region as well. We're looking for 4 to 8 inches of snow there with wind gusts on the order of 40 to 50 miles per hour. And down around the St. Lawrence Island area, we're expecting a wind gusts there upwards of 70 miles per hour with 6 to 12 inches of snow. As we move into the interior a little bit more in the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, looking for anywhere from 12 to about 25 inches of snow. That's 1 to 2 feet of snow as we go from today and into tomorrow and early Wednesday morning. Winter storm warnings are posted for your area, and again, some strong wind gusts in the region. Down into the middle Yukon Valley, about 5 to 10 inches of snow. This will last through Tuesday. And the lower Yukon Valley, expecting about 5 to 10 inches of snow in general. This will go all the way out toward the Yukon Delta, where you might actually see a little bit of ice mixed in as well. Into the yellow shaded areas, winter weather advisories are posted for the North Slope and the Brooks Range, expecting from about 3 to 6 inches of snow as we go through Tuesday and into Wednesday. Up around Bettles and into the central interior, about 4 to 7 inches of snow. That does include the middle Tanana Valley as well. Down into the Susitna Valley, expecting 6 to 10 inches of snow. That'll start tonight and go into tomorrow. It looks like most of that will be along and west of the Parks Highway, and areas in the eastern Alaska Range can see as much as 6 to 11 inches of snow as we go from about noon on Tuesday to noon on Wednesday. So no question about it, this will be an impactful storm for many, whether you're driving or flying around the state. And for those out west, it's not just the first storm, but the second storm that will move through into St. Lawrence Island. So Wednesday night and Thursday, especially for our Bering Strait communities, the winds will be rough this first time around. Again, the gusts up to 70 miles per hour tonight and into tomorrow. But then as we get into Wednesday night and Thursday, a second round of wind will be moving through. So you also have a high wind watch posted for your region for Wednesday night and Thursday for gusts that could reach up toward 80 miles per hour. So there's a possibility places like Savunga will be dealing with some very strong winds. So keep your eye on the weather out west. And again, especially if you're in the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, the Seward Peninsula, out towards St. Lawrence Island, you plan for at least some heavy snow in the next 24 to 36 hours. Let's take a look at the overall weather picture, I should say. Here's the satellite picture, and you can see this powerful low moving across the western Bering Sea, pushing a front as it moves across the eastern interior. A lot of dry air out in front, and what that means is for areas in southeast that have had low pressure hovering nearby, there's really not a whole lot to work with. There's a few areas of showers here, mainly across the southern half of southeast. Most of that has been rain, though we have seen some reports of snow up around Stewart today. Up north, the winds are blowing, and at times you can see that affecting the visibility reports. Out across Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, ice will be on the move, and with the strong southerly flow, it'll likely pull the ice away from the south or the north-facing coast and push that a little bit closer to some of the more south-facing coasts. So ice up here across the southern sections of Norton Sound could end up a little bit closer to Nome, and many areas south of Cape Newingham, maybe even south of Nunivak Island, we'll see a decent reduction in the ice thanks to the wind and wave action as well as some of the warmer weather down south. You can see the colder air wrapping in on top of this into that giant vacuum of low pressure out across the west. And as we go ahead, this front will continue working its way all the way into the central and eastern interior as we get into tomorrow. And then by Wednesday, it's even going to keep itself together all the way into the western sections of Canada and parts of southeast before falling apart. So this is just one storm, though, in the wave train. We have one of these working its way through, and then another hot on its heels that'll be moving up through the Bering Strait as we get into Wednesday night and Thursday. So again, weak low pressure across the eastern Gulf at 1,009 millibars, some pockets of rain and a little bit of high altitude snow. High pressure sitting across western Canada at 1,023 millibars. Current wave of low pressure just west of the Bering Strait at 1,010 millibars. This is helping to encourage that strong southerly flow with periods of snow and blowing snow already being reported in the region, and the low pressure system itself that's at the core at 945 millibars. As we get into tonight, the front will work its way into the west coast all the way from the Yukon Delta up to the Selawik Valley at 957 millibars. This is going to be moving in a lot of wind, and once again, wind gusts could be on the range of 60 to 70 miles per hour, generally in the Bering Strait region and into the Kotzebue Sound area, generally for the windward slopes there. Now, the additional long period of upslope winds into the western Brooks Range could mean that you're going to get 1 to 2 feet of snow in that region. So plan on heavy snow for the next 24 to 36 hours there. Snow will spread quickly eastward along the Brooks Range tonight and into tomorrow, and also into the Susitna Valley. So areas along and west of the Parks Highway stand to pick up a decent amount of snow there, as much as 6 to 10 inches of snow, and in some places perhaps as much as 14. Snow will continue across the western coast, though the core of that heavier snow will still remain up across the northwest. And here's our next weather maker, the one that's following hot on its heels. You can see that quickly entering the picture as we head into Wednesday. And there will be an opportunity again for some mixed precipitation across North Sound and maybe the Yukon Delta. We'll have to see how much of that warm air gets brought back into the weather picture as we get into Wednesday. This could all end up being snow, but it certainly has the potential of being a little bit on the warmer side too. So we'll have to be careful and keep watch on that. So make sure you're paying attention to your forecast on St. Lawrence Island and around the Bering Strait. With wind gusts upwards of 60 to maybe as high as 80 miles per hour potentially across the corridor here all the way up toward the Selawik Valley and as far south as St. Lawrence Island and maybe even the western sections of Norton Sound. Let's take a look at the weather picture as far as temperatures go as we get into Tuesday morning. Teens and 20s cooling down for many parts of southeast, and the same goes for south central. In fact, don't be surprised to see some new ice in Cook Inlet as a result of the next couple nights of being a little bit colder. Anywhere from 14 in Anchorage to 28 in Kodiak, 8 below in Fort Yukon, 6 below in Barrow, 26 in Nome, and very mild across southwest of the Alaska Peninsula and the chain thanks to that strong southerly flow. You can see that moving that warmth all the way into Kotzebue Sound with temperatures approaching the freezing mark there up around Shishmaref and Kotzebue. 32 in Nome, mid to upper 30s for many in the southwest coast, closer to 40 around King Salmon. Upper 30s and lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Kodiak 40, low to mid 30s for many in southeast, 6 in Arctic Village and 11 in Barrow. Overnight lows Wednesday morning, looking like 20s for many in southeast, Sitka closer to 35. Mid to upper teens for Prince William Sound, South Central, Kodiak 33. King Salmon and Dillingham in the mid-20s, Nunivak Island closer to 27, Savunga 28, 8 in Barrow, 13 for Bettles, and in the mid-teens for areas around Fairbanks, 31 to start the day in St. Paul, up to 37 by Wednesday afternoon. 20s and 30s for many in south and west. You can see temperatures really not changing much from Tuesday afternoon into Wednesday. 18 in Barrow and warming up, 15 in Fort Yukon, 20 in Fairbanks, low 30s for South Central, 40 in Kodiak, and mid-30s to low 40s in parts of southeast as we go through Wednesday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to your flying weather for Tuesday morning. As the front moves in across the west, we will see reductions in visibility and ceiling with areas of snow and blowing snow across some of the west and northern communities, and rain mixing with snow and just plenty of wind and turbulence across the chain in the Alaska Peninsula and then spreading into western Alaska as we go through the day and into the afternoon. Look for IFR to push eastward into the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound as we get into the afternoon, also the middle Yukon Valley and the upper Koyukuk. Across the coastal plain, MVFR should be limited to areas generally west of Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse out toward Barrow and Wainwright, and IFR offshore. Another round of IFR develops across the western chain with a second system developing. MVFR should be fairly widespread and linger throughout the evening and overnight hours for many communities along the west coast, St. Lawrence Island down toward St. Paul and St. George down to Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. As we get into Wednesday morning, watch for the batch of IFR across the south to spread even further eastward into Yakutat, not quite into south and northern sections of southeast just yet, but MVFR will be sneaking its way into Cross Sound. Look for IFR conditions across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, with MVFR fairly mixed across the Yukon Valley, south of that into the Kuskokwim, breaking up a little bit, and then back into Bristol Bay, and IFR conditions around Lake Iliamna and the western Alaska Range. IFR becomes more widespread across central and southern sections of the Bering Sea and into the central chain. By the afternoon, you can see that stretching out along another frontal boundary from St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait south toward Adak and Atka. Meanwhile, interior locations should see improvement during the afternoon Wednesday, with MVFR mixed across the central and eastern parts of the Tanana Valley, southward into the Copper River and parts of the Kenai Peninsula, and MVFR and patchy IFR across central and southern parts of southeast. Let's take a look at your pass conditions for tomorrow now, Tuesday. Anaktuvik Pass expected to turn over toward IFR as we go through the daytime. Expect similar conditions in Adigan Pass. Might start out okay, but again, expect a lowered visibility and ceiling by the end of the day for sure. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will likely hold at IFR through a good part of the day and not see a whole lot of improvement until we get into perhaps Wednesday. The same goes for Rainy Pass. Instrument flight rules should be expected through most of your Tuesday. Windy Pass, we expect to see a visual flight rule to start the day, but slowly leaning over toward MVFR, and Isabel Pass should see similar conditions there with a clean start and maybe a little bit of a messier finish. As we get toward Mentasta Pass right now, it looks to be VFR through most of your day tomorrow. Tanita Pass, we expect to see that lean over hard to IFR by the midday hours. And as we get into Portage Pass, things should start out okay. Most of the visibility restrictions won't come in until later on in the afternoon. And Chilkoot and White Pass, as you just saw, should be pretty clean for your Tuesday. Freezing levels indicate that strong surge of southerly wind driving freezing levels to Kodiak Island up above 6,000 feet. For many just south of the Alaska Range and Lake Iliamna, levels will be limited at about 2,000 feet and below, and that goes for southeast, all of the interior, and of course south and western Alaska, with the surface freezing line up around Nunivak Island to St. Matthew and into the Gulf of Anadyr and right along the outer coast of southeast. Icing potential will be moving upwards there as far as that low level goes. Look for 6,000 to 7,000 foot and above for areas along the Alcan border all the way up toward Kaktovik. For the western communities, from Wainwright and Barrow southward, above 4,000 to about 6,000 feet around Bethel to about 8,000 feet around Nikolsky and Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and points west there. The main threat will be with this next wave of incoming weather. The jet stream has our trough of low pressure now situated a little bit further east, with the low very close to parts of the Pacific Northwest, a strong northerly flow at 95 to 110 knots, and then just a gigantic southerly stream coming in off the North Pacific and across western Alaska today and moving eastward tomorrow at about 120 knots from south to north. At 9,000 feet, you can see that ridge of high pressure has tried to channel this wind a little bit, but all it's done is really strengthen the west and southwesterly flow into western and south central Alaska. Anywhere from 25 to about 50 knots, southerly winds over St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula, and most of the northwest. Anywhere from 40 to 50 knots at its strongest, with northerly strong across southeast at about 45 knots, and a similar pattern at 3,000 feet. Strongest winds around southeast, 20 to 40 knots or so, again, generally on a northerly flow, and a west and southwesterly flow that's as strong as 50 to 70 knots across the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Chain, with west and southwestern locations really bearing the brunt of this, including areas over the Bering Strait. So turbulence potential will focus on St. Lawrence Island tomorrow below 4,000 feet, some considerable moderate at least, and probably some isolated severe. So you probably want to avoid this area as we go through the daytime tomorrow. The upper Koyukuk, the upper Kuskokwim out towards southwestern Alaska, generally below 4,000 to about 5,000 feet. Considerable moderate will continue spreading eastward as we get into your Wednesday and Thursday, and then another round of extreme wind probably heading right for the Bering Strait communities.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the sun doesn't stay at the sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane, about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy, and then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of your sea ice edge. A lot of the conditions across the Bering Sea will be changing as warmer air is spreading quickly up through the Bering Strait. A lot of the action that will reduce the ice coverage there will be the wind and wave action. There will be some warmer air moving around, but the wind and waves will probably have a lot more to do with it than anything else. You'll notice there are going to be some changes here across Norton Sound. Watch for some of the ice across the Yukon Delta coastline to move northward, and the same goes for areas along the northern sections of the Seward Peninsula. Watch for some of that to be pushed away from the coast, exposing some of the areas closer to the coastline on those north-facing slopes and along the west-facing coast as well. For the very latest analysis, whether it's today, tomorrow, or the next week to come, you can get the forecast as well anytime you want at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Take a look at the forecast now for southeast. Northerlies will be gusty at times across Stevens Passage, gusting up to 35 knots. Otherwise, sustained winds only 15 to 20. Look for 3 to 4 foot seas on the inside and about 7 to 10 foot seas across the outside with a west and northerly flow down the outer coast. About 15 to 25 or so as we go through your Tuesday. By Wednesday, an onshore flow picks up a little bit more, 20 to 25 knots, 8 to 9 foot seas across the outside. A southeasterly flow across the central and northern interchannels, 15 to 20, with gusts picking up to 35 knots in the Lynn Canal, and 2 to 4 foot seas should be expected there on Wednesday. For south central, southeasterlies moving in through Prince William Sound at 20 knots, expect a 4 foot sea, 6 to 10 foot seas across the northern Gulf, anywhere from 25 to 30 knots from the south. Northeasterlies coming down northern sections of Cook Inlet, but you can see that south and easterly flow developing south of Kenai, anywhere from 25 to 30 knots with a 7 to 9 foot sea on Tuesday. Strengthening a little bit more from the south and west as we go into the midweek there, with westerlies picking up in the western Gulf, 15 to 25, 7 to 11 foot seas. Northwesterlies turning in Prince William Sound with 3 foot seas expected there, and southwesterlies coming up Cook Inlet, 15 to 20 as we go through your Wednesday. Now, once again, back to the busy part of the state. Southwesterlies going through Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island, 30 knots on either side. 12 foot seas there, 10 to 19 foot seas down the Bering Sea coast, and 15 to 20 looking at the North Pacific coastline, 30 to 35 knot winds on Tuesday. A little bit more of a south bend as we get into Wednesday at 25 to 35 knots across the southern end of the Alaska Peninsula, 12 to 15 foot seas there, 4 to 9 foot seas on either side of Kodiak Island, 15 to 20 knot winds. And southerlies, 25 knots with a 9 foot sea inside of Bristol Bay on Wednesday. The highest seas on Tuesday will be out across the middle of the Bering Sea. A strong southwesterly flow on the south side of that. The strongest winds out across the western chain, 45 to 50 knots, 25 to 26 foot seas. You're looking at about 20 to 25 foot seas across the central and eastern chain. 30 to 40 knots are expected there on Tuesday. Much stronger flow coming through the central chain as we get into Wednesday, as that frontal boundary is whipping through there. Seas coming up to about 35 to 40 feet and maybe higher in some cases in the central Bering. 19 to 24 foot seas across the central and eastern Bering Sea coast. 14 to 30 foot seas there across the Pacific coastline. Out west, 28 foot seas there from Kiska all the way out toward Adak on a strong westerly wind up to 55 knots. 60 knots is the peak wind there north of Adak and Atka. Tuesday across the west coast, a south and westerly flow will continue there. 30 to 40 knots expected there with 25 to 32 foot seas from the Pribilovs northward towards St. Matthew. As we go into Wednesday, the high seas still stay west of St. Paul and St. George with winds coming up to 50, even 55 knots there. So strong storm force winds expected across the entire region. 30 to 40 knots inside of Norton Sound, outward towards St. Lawrence Island with an 18-foot sea there, 29-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George, all of that coming in from the south. Across the northwest coast, 25 to 40 knots there through the Bering Strait and the open waters. Look for 9 to 20 foot seas in the region. The Beaufort Sea coast, a strong easterly flow, 20 to 30 knots, 35 knots down the Chukchi coast from the south and east. Becoming a little more southerly on Wednesday, but we hold on to that stiff southerly flow. 30 to 40 knots there on Wednesday with 18-foot seas north of St. Lawrence Island. A south and westerly flow develops over the Beaufort Sea coast. Recapping tonight's weather, a very strong front moving across the west coast will create blizzard conditions for the St. Lawrence Island and the northwestern Bering Sea coast, as well as parts of Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula. Looking for as much as 12 to 25 inches of snow across the Kobuk and Noatak valleys there with winter storm warnings. Blizzard conditions are expected, though, around the Bering Strait as well as St. Lawrence Island, where you may see 6 to 12 inches of snow and gusts upwards of 70 miles per hour. The front blows into the interior tomorrow, spreading snow fall across parts of Fairbanks and the North Slope. Anywhere from about 4 to as much as 12 inches of snow may fall in the region. South-facing coastlines of the Gulf will pick up some heavy rain. Southeast is in the clear for now, and another wave of very strong winds heading for the Bering Strait communities Wednesday night into Thursday, and specifically St. Lawrence Island. So keep an eye on the weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.